Trump and the Forgotten Soldier. It was a cold evening in New York City, the kind that made people pull their coats tighter and walk a little faster. The streets were filled with holiday lights, but the warmth of the decorations did little to comfort those without shelter. Among them was Sarah Jennings, a woman in her late 50s, wrapped in a tattered military jacket with an old unit patch still visible on the sleeve. A former Marine Corps medic, she had served in Afghanistan, saving lives under fire. But after returning home, life hadn't been kind. An injury, PTSD, and a bureaucratic nightmare had left her homeless for the past 5 years. She sat near Trump Tower, a place she usually avoided, but the night was especially cold, and the heated vents from the building provided some relief. She had no idea that tonight, fate had something unusual in store for her. The encounter. Donald J. Trump stepped out of the building, flanked by 2 security guards. He was supposed to be heading to a dinner meeting, but something made him stop. His sharp gaze fell on Sarah. Most people ignored the homeless, pretending they didn't exist. But Trump wasn't most people. He walked right up to her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying authority, "what's your name?" Sarah looked up, squinting against the bright city lights. Was this a joke? Some cruel prank? She had no patience for it. "Sarah," she muttered, expecting him to walk away. Instead, he crouched down, bringing himself to eye level. "You're a veteran," he said, noticing the patch on her jacket. "Yeah," she replied hesitantly. "Where'd you serve?" "Afghanistan." "Sanjan Province," she said, her voice carrying a hint of pride. Trump nodded, clearly recognizing the name. That was a hell of a place. Sarah wasn't sure what was happening, but then she noticed something odd. He looked genuinely interested. "Are you getting VA support?" Sarah scoffed. "If you mean the endless paperwork and waiting lists, sure. I gave up on that a long time ago." Trump's expression changed. It wasn't pity. It was anger. Not at her, but at the system. The unexpected decision. Without hesitation, Trump stood up, pulled out his phone, and made a call right there. "Get me someone from the VA. Now." His guards exchanged glances. This wasn't part of the schedule. But Trump didn't care. While waiting, he took off his own cashmere coat and placed it over Sarah's shoulders. "Sir, you don't have to," she started. "Sarah," he interrupted, "I built towers, casinos, and golf courses. But none of that means anything if we let our heroes rot on the streets." A car pulled up. It wasn't just any car. It was one of Trump's personal vehicles. "You're coming with me," he said. Sarah hesitated. This was too surreal. Where? To a hotel. Then to a doctor. Then to someone who's gonna fix this mess. She stared at him, looking for the catch. There wasn't one. For the first time in years, someone actually saw her. The media frenzy. By the next morning, the story had spread like wildfire. News outlets were stunned. Footage of Trump helping a homeless veteran into his car played across every channel. Some people called it a publicity stunt. Others saw it as a powerful statement. But for Sarah, it was something much simpler. It was a chance. Over the next few weeks, Trump kept his word. He paid for a full medical evaluation, therapy, and even set up a job interview at one of his properties. When asked why he did it, he simply shrugged. "Our country owes everything to people like her," he said. "You want to make America great again? Start by taking care of the people who made it great in the first place." A new beginning. For the first time in years, Sarah slept in a real bed. Not in a shelter where she had to clutch her backpack for fear of theft. Not on a subway bench where police would shoo her away. A real bed, with clean sheets, a warm blanket, and a view of the city she had once loved but had long since abandoned Hope, Indiana. The hotel Trump put her in wasn't just some rundown motel on the outskirts of town. It was 5-star. It had hot showers, room service, and a security team that treated her like a guest, not a burden. She barely recognized herself when she looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was still thin, still worn from years on the streets, but there was something new in her eyes, hope. The meeting that changed everything. 2 days later, Trump's team arranged a meeting with VA officials. Not the ones who usually pushed paperwork around, but top-level administrators. Trump sat at the head of the table, flanked by his aides. Sarah sat beside him, feeling out of place in her new clothes, a tailored coat and fresh boots he had sent over. "Tell them your story," Trump said. His voice was firm, commanding, as if he was preparing for a business negotiation. Sarah took a deep breath. "I served as a medic in Afghanistan. I saved lives, but when I came home, I had nothing. My benefits were delayed, then denied. I applied for housing assistance, never heard back. I fought for my country, but no one fought for me." The VA officials shifted in their seats. Trump folded his arms. "Fix this." One of the men cleared his throat. "We, understand the issues, Mr. Trump, and we have procedures in place." "Don't give me bureaucracy," Trump snapped. "Give me results. I want Sarah housed, employed, and I want you to audit every damn case like hers." Silence. The room had never been so quiet. Finally, one of the VA reps spoke. "We'll see what we can do." Trump smirked. "Wrong answer. You'll do it. And if you don't, I'll make sure the whole country knows your names." That was the moment Sarah realized something. It wasn't just about her. Trump had just declared war on veteran homelessness. The domino effect. Sarah's case became a national headline. Journalists dug deeper, uncovering thousands of veterans stuck in the same system, lost in red tape. Under mounting pressure, the VA announced emergency reforms. Funding increased. Case backlogs were cleared. More veterans started getting the help they had been promised. But Trump wasn't done. At a press conference, he made an announcement that shocked everyone. "I'm launching the Heroes First initiative, a private program to house and employ homeless veterans. We're starting with 500 homes and job training centers across the country. And guess who's helping me run it?" He gestured, and Sarah stepped onto the stage. The crowd exploded. Reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Jennings, how does it feel to go from homeless to leading a national program?" Sarah looked at Trump, then back at the crowd. "It feels like a second chance," she said. "And I intend to make damn sure I'm not the only one who gets one." Legacy. Months passed. Then a year. The Heroes First initiative expanded to every major city. Homeless veteran numbers plummeted. The program provided not just housing, but purpose, jobs, therapy, and new mission. And Sarah? She became the face of the movement. From sleeping on the streets to speaking at the White House, she made it her life's mission to help others like her. One day, during a televised interview, the reporter asked, "If Trump hadn't stopped that night, where would you be now?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Dead," she admitted. Then she smiled. "But he did stop. And because of that, thousands more will live." The final scene. Years later, Trump sat in his Florida estate, watching the news. On the screen, Sarah stood before a crowd, unveiling the 100th Heroes First Center. A reporter asked, "What do you say to those who doubt the program?" Sarah chuckled. "I'd tell them to walk the streets and look around. You'll see fewer veterans there. That's not magic, it's action." Trump smirked. He leaned back, took a sip of Diet Coke, and nodded. "Not bad," he muttered to himself. "Not bad at all. A movement bigger than politics." As Heroes First initiative continued to grow, it became clear that this was no longer just a charity, it was a movement. Celebrities, billionaires, and everyday Americans started donating. Business owners signed up to offer jobs to veterans. Some of Trump's biggest critics were forced to admit, whatever else people thought about him, this was real change. One evening, Sarah sat in her office at the newly established Heroes First National Headquarters in Washington, D.C. The office was decorated with military memorabilia, photos of veterans the initiative had helped, and a framed picture of her younger self in uniform. She was about to leave for the night when her phone rang. "Sarah," the familiar voice said. "Mr. Trump," she responded, smiling. "To what do I owe the honor?" "Just checking in. You're making me look good out there," he joked. Sarah chuckled. "I think you did that yourself when you picked me up off the street." "Yeah, well," Trump said, his tone more serious, "I didn't do it for the cameras. I did it because our country owes you. And I don't believe in debt we don't pay." Sarah swallowed. She knew by now that Trump's words, whether people liked them or not, were always direct, always real. "Well, you should know something," she said. "There's a veteran out in California who just moved into his first home thanks to the initiative. He told me something today." "What's that?" He said, "I thought America forgot about me. But then I saw what you did for Sarah. And I realized maybe we still matter." For a moment, there was silence. Then Trump cleared his throat. "Good. That's good." Sarah smirked. "You okay there, sir? Getting emotional on me?" "Me? Emotional? Never." He scoffed. "All right, Sarah, keep up the good work. I'll check in soon." She could tell he was about to hang up, but she stopped him. "Mr. Trump?" "Yeah." "Thank you." There was another pause. Then, his voice came through, steady and full of conviction. "Don't thank me. Just keep winning." The call ended, but Sarah sat there for a long time, staring at the phone, reflecting on how much had changed since that cold night outside Trump Tower. She was no longer just another forgotten soldier. She was leading an army of second chances. And America was finally listening. Epilogue: A Nation Remembers. Years passed. The Heroes First initiative became one of the most successful veteran support programs in U.S. history. It had provided homes, jobs, and medical care to tens of thousands of veterans who had once been forgotten. Sarah Jennings became a household name, appearing in interviews, advocating for veterans on Capitol Hill, and personally working with struggling servicemen and women to help them rebuild their lives. But no moment was more surreal than the invitation to the White House. The Medal of Freedom. Sarah stood before a packed room, the American flag behind her. Every major news outlet was broadcasting live. Veterans from all branches sat in the audience, along with business leaders, celebrities, and politicians from both sides of the aisle. And standing at the podium was President Donald J. Trump. Today, Trump began, his voice strong, "We honor a woman who represents the very best of this country. A warrior who fought overseas, and when the war ended, kept fighting for those who wore the uniform. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to control the emotion swelling in her chest. Trump continued. A few years ago, I met Sarah on the streets of New York. She had been abandoned by a system that should have protected her. That night, I made a promise to her and to every veteran that no soldier who serves this country should ever be left behind. The crowd applauded. Sarah felt her eyes sting, but she kept her head high. And let me tell you, Trump added, smirking, she took that promise and turned it into something bigger than any of us could have imagined. He turned to look at her. So today, it is my great honor to award Sarah Jennings the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her tireless dedication to our nation's heroes. The room erupted. As Trump placed the medal around her neck, Sarah felt the weight, not just of the medal, but of everything she had been through. From the battlefield, to the streets, to the highest honor in the land. She whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. Thank you for stopping that night. Trump gave her a nod. Thank you for proving me right. Final scene, a legacy lives on. Years later, long after Trump had left office, and long after Sarah had stepped down from running Heroes First, a new president stood at a podium, addressing the nation. Behind them, a brand new facility was being unveiled. A massive, state-of-the-art center dedicated to providing veterans with housing, job training, and mental health services. The sign above it read, "The Sarah Jennings Veterans Center." The camera panned to Sarah, now older but just as strong, standing in the front row, watching as the doors opened. Beside her stood young veterans, inspired by her story, ready to continue the mission. A reporter asked, "Ms. Jennings, how does it feel to see your name on this building?" She smiled. "It's not about my name," she said. "It's about the people who will walk through those doors. And the fact that no veteran will ever be forgotten again." As the sun set over Washington, D.C., one thing was clear: what started as one simple act of kindness had changed the course of history. And America had finally repaid its debt to those who served. 5 years later. Sarah Jennings never thought of herself as a politician. She was a fighter, a medic, a survivor, but never the kind of person to stand behind a podium and make speeches. Yet, here she was. Standing before thousands of supporters at a rally in Ohio, she adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. The American flag waved behind her, and the roar of the crowd was deafening. She looked out at them, not just civilians, but veterans, active duty soldiers, first responders, and the families of those who had served. They weren't here because of political games. They were here because they believed in her. 5 years ago, she began, her voice strong, I was sleeping on the streets of New York City. Forgotten. Abandoned by a system that should have had my back. Then, a man stopped. He saw me. And that moment changed everything. The crowd cheered as they recognized the story. She smiled. But this movement, this fight, was never about just one person. It's about all of us. It's about making sure every veteran, every working American, every family struggling to make ends meet has a voice in Washington. A chant broke out. Sarah! 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 She took a deep breath. The weight of this moment felt heavier than any battlefield. That's why, she continued, I'm here to tell you today. I am officially running for the United States Senate. The stadium exploded. Fireworks lit up the sky. The music blasted. And in that moment, Sarah Jennings, the once homeless veteran, was no longer just an advocate. She was on her way to becoming a leader of the free world. The call that changed everything. Back at campaign headquarters, Sarah was shaking hands, taking pictures, and feeling the overwhelming energy of the night. Then, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. "This is Sarah." A familiar voice chuckled. "Senator Jennings has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" She froze. "Mr. Trump?" "You bet," he said. "Saw your speech. Damn good. You're gonna win this thing." Sarah smiled, pacing the room. "You really think so?" Trump scoffed. "I don't think. I know. And when you do, remember, you don't owe Washington a damn thing. You owe the American people everything." Sarah nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I won't forget." "Good," Trump said. "Now, go kick some ass." She hung up, her hands still shaking. But not from fear. From excitement. Because this wasn't just a campaign. This was a mission. And Sarah Jennings had never failed a mission in her life. The road to the White House. 1 year later, election night. The atmosphere in Sarah Jennings' campaign headquarters was electric. The results were pouring in, and the numbers looked strong. She had started as the underdog. A political outsider. A veteran with no political experience but with a cause that resonated across party lines. She wasn't backed by Washington elites. She was backed by the people. And now, as the final precincts reported, the numbers on the screen told the story. Sarah Jennings, 53.2%. Incumbent Senator Mark Holloway, 46.8%. The room erupted. Her campaign manager grabbed her by the shoulders. "Sarah, you did it. You won." For a moment, she just stood there, overwhelmed. Then the phone rang. Her team hushed as she answered. "Hello?" A familiar voice came through. Well. Senator Jennings." She grinned. "Mr. Trump." "Knew you'd win," he said. "America loves a fighter." Sarah exhaled, nodding. "Now comes the hard part." Trump chuckled. "Kid, if you think the campaign was hard, wait till you deal with the swamp. But don't let them change you." "I won't," she promised. "You better not," he said. "Because something tells me this isn't where your journey ends." Senator Jennings, a disruptor in Washington. Sarah shook up Capitol Hill from the moment she stepped onto the Senate floor. She wasn't there to play political games. She was there to fight for veterans, for working Americans, for the forgotten. She grilled VA officials over delayed benefits. She challenged defense contractors profiting off endless wars. She worked across party lines to push bipartisan reforms. And the people loved her for it. Everywhere she went, veterans lined up to shake her hand. Americans who had given up on politics believed in her. Then came the next call from Trump. "You're making a lot of enemies," he said. "Good," Sarah replied. He laughed. "That's what I like to hear." Then, after a pause, he added, "Sarah, have you ever thought about running for president?" Silence. Sarah leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. She had never imagined herself in the Oval Office. But now? Now, it didn't seem so impossible. The decision that shocked the world. 3 years later, at a massive rally in Texas, Sarah Jennings stood before a crowd of 50,000 people. She took a deep breath, gripping the podium. "When I came home from war, I was forgotten. When I was homeless, I was invisible. But today, I stand before you as a senator because the American people refuse to let me be forgotten." The crowd roared. "I didn't come to Washington to play politics. I came to fight. And now, I'm ready for the biggest fight of all." She looked directly into the cameras, speaking to every American watching at home. "That's why today, I'm officially announcing my campaign for President of the United States." The crowd exploded. Fireworks lit up the night sky. The chants were deafening. "Sarah! Sarah! Sarah!" Somewhere, watching the news, Donald Trump smirked and leaned back in his chair. "I told you," he muttered. The soldier who had once been homeless was now on her way to the White House. Madam President. Election night, 4 years later. The world watched as the final results came in. The race had been brutal, but Sarah Jennings had fought like hell, just like she always had. Now, the numbers were flashing on screens across the nation. Sarah Jennings/VP Mark Rodriguez, 290 electoral votes. Opponent, 248 electoral votes. A moment of stunned silence swept through her campaign headquarters. Then, the explosion of cheers. Staffers screamed. Supporters cried. Fireworks lit up the Washington sky. Sarah Jennings, the once homeless veteran, the underdog, the fighter who refused to quit, had just been elected the first female veteran president of the United States. She stood frozen, watching the results. The weight of history settled on her shoulders. Then, her phone buzzed. She already knew who it was. She answered. Mr. Trump. His voice was warm, almost proud. Well. Look at you." Sarah let out a breathless laugh. "I can't believe it." "You better believe it," he said. "America wanted a fighter. And they got one." She swallowed hard. "I couldn't have done this without that night. Without you stopping." There was a pause. Then, Trump spoke, his voice carrying the same conviction it always had. "You did this because you never gave up. That's why you won. Now, listen to me. Don't let them change you. Don't forget who you fight for. And when the swamp comes for you, because they will, hit 'em harder." Sarah nodded, holding back emotion. "I won't forget." "I know you won't," Trump said. "Now go run the damn country." Inauguration Day. A cold wind swept across Washington, D.C. as Sarah Jennings stood on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, staring out at millions of Americans. Veterans stood in the front row, many of them once homeless, now with families, jobs, and hope. She placed her hand on the Bible. "I, Sarah Jennings, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States." The words echoed through history. As she finished, the crowd erupted into cheers. Tears filled her eyes, but she stood tall. A soldier to the end. Somewhere, in his Florida estate, Donald Trump watched the broadcast. He took a sip of Diet Coke and smirked. "Not bad," he muttered. "Not bad at all. A legacy that lasts forever." Sarah Jennings spent the next 8 years as president, fighting for veterans, rebuilding America's strength, and proving that no one was beyond redemption. Her presidency inspired millions. But her greatest achievement wasn't a bill or a speech. It was a movement. A movement that proved that one act of kindness, one moment of belief, could change the world. And it all started on a cold New York night, when a man saw a forgotten soldier and decided to do something about it.